Good afternoon. My name is Martin Large. I'm here with Guy Clapperton. Guy, you are variously described as the editor of UC Insight,
Yes, guilty.
a journalist,
Yes, yeah.
social media expert,
Written a couple
author.
of books. Yeah, on social media, so I multitask those two things,
Excellent.
between.
And are we allowed to say stand-up comedian?
You're allowed to say it. I've only done a few open mic spots, and sometimes they work, and that's great, and often they don't. And you're greeted with what I like to call respectful silence. There we are.
Excellent. So you've written 2 books on social media.
I have,
But
yes.
I understand that you're in the process of writing a book on unified communications.
Well, yeah, that certainly is part of it. It's really about smarter working, flexible working, which of course involves UC massively. The fact that we can work wherever we want is facilitated by the technology, but we'll also be covering things like, I'm co-writing with another fella, we'll also be writing stuff like about office design, architecture. We'll be speaking to architects. It's all about working where it's appropriate, and not assuming that flexible working means you will work from home on Friday, as some organisations say, because that's not really flexible at all.
So it's about the appropriate working space for the task you're undertaking currently.
That's exactly right. It was partly inspired by my co-author, who's very much in the in that technology area, a chap called Philip Van Hoot. He's been in this area for ages and ages, but he became quite fascinated by the idea. This is in the 1980s, 90s sometime. He had his first mobile phone. You remember how they were, great big mobile phone, and his first luggable computer. They didn't call them laptops. It would damage your lap at the time, but nonetheless portable. And he caught himself thinking, why am I still being forced to work in an office when I have everything I need in front of me, and it's portable? And it's only very recently that management has effectively started agreeing, mostly because his generation are now in management.
We hear a lot about unified communications. What is your definition of it?
Well, communications, really, I think it's a term which I think is going to outlive its usefulness very quickly. Stuff I've seen demonstrated would include, for example, the idea that you and I might be having a conversation on the phone. I might be in the car, I might be anywhere, you don't know. So I come off the car speaker system, get out of the car, walk into the office, still holding my phone. You don't know that I've switched to handheld because it doesn't matter to you. Flip over to perhaps the landline, or perhaps say a soft phone on the computer, sit down more comfortably. Again, you're not interrupted, it's all the same to you. Perhaps you need to escalate it to do a little face-to-face, so flick on the video and it's all still the same call, and then maybe share a few documents, that sort of thing. And all this becomes one communication. So instead of having, say, all right, we'd better shut that down and go into GoToMeeting or something like that, we carry on with the same call the whole time. It's all just bringing it all together. Also, there are elements of social media in it, internal social media, so that we can be having a conversation just as easily on instant message, or, in an area of something like, say, Yammer, which is a Facebook lookalike for for private networks.
So kind of seamless switching across multiple communication platforms.
That would be it from that side. The way I prefer to think of it is focusing back on the message and the communication rather than the technology behind it. So you and I become completely neutral on which technology we're using, whether we're face-to-face, whether we're using one of the video systems that I know that you sell, whether we're using a phone that Apple released a couple of weeks ago, whatever it is, doesn't actually matter to us. We will stop eventually thinking about it. The underpinnings become less important because it's all become unified and just delivered wherever you want to on which device.
Yeah, so what we would have called 10 years ago ubiquitous computing. So you don't see the computer, you don't see the display, it's all just part of the way that you work.
That's exactly right. It's like, people ask me occasionally about social media, and that's another term I think is going to pass away from usefulness because it's going to become so mainstream. 15 years ago, I was attending press conferences with IBM, and they were talking about e-business. e-business being a business that used electronic communication somehow. And you worked out eventually that if you just sent somebody an email, as far as they were concerned, you were an e-business. Now, that was useful at the time because it was a minority of people doing it. It became useless very quickly, or redundant, I should say. I don't want to criticize anybody. It became redundant very quickly because it just became so mainstream. So, yeah, I think all this stuff is becoming mainstream.
So it's not about the technology.
Well, it's very much about the technology, and that you have to have the technology. It's no use saying, I can do all this really useful stuff. Give you a quick anecdote. Years ago, I was doing some writing for a computer catalog company. And this is, I can tell you exactly when it was. It must have been 1995 because Windows 95 was released. There was all the TV adverts and everything saying this is going to revolutionize your computer. And this guy sold a copy and someone called his support team and said, this Windows 95, what do I do with it? How's it going to revolutionize my business? And he said, well, it just makes it much faster. And the bloke said, well, what do I do with it? He said, well, have you installed it on your computer? And there was a pause and he said, I need a computer. So yeah, it is kind of about the technology. Because if you haven't got the technology, if you haven't got your lovely headsets or your lovely iPhones or Android or Windows Phone or whatever else you want to use, BlackBerry, all those things, you're going to be excluded from it. But once you've established the technology, it should really be taking it right away from being about the technology and being all about people again.
But you're still going to have a bunch of Silicon Luddites somewhere in your organisation that just don't buy the use of the technology.
That can happen. That can happen to an awful lot of people. I think the management needs to explain very carefully to them the reasons why this is a good idea. It needs to take them through why it's an advantage to them not to have to commute into work, and why working by yourself sometimes or working with people when appropriate and working as appropriate is a good idea. And also, I think, to an extent, you need to persuade people as managers, without being unkind or without waving the big stick around, you need to be able to feel that you can persuade them that this isn't actually their time. It's time they're being paid for. So it's your company's time. And if your company's decided that everybody's going to have a smartphone and a soft phone and get rid of the landline, that's kind of what's going to happen.
So the user adoption piece, or in old money, training, is less about how you use this and more about how you change the way in which you work.
I think the user adoption piece isn't training in old money, it's management and motivation in old money. You tell somebody that their life will be better with this. Now, there will be people who've heard this 1,000 times before. It's another darling computer system, and they've heard this so many times before they'd really rather you just left them alone. But once they've established they really can work from home, still be as effective, or can work from a cafe, or can work in a shared working space, or whatever is appropriate, then or that you've got areas designated in your office for contemplation, or for where they can get themselves away, do some number crunching, and also areas like this room where you can have great big meetings and things like that. Once they've actually got used to that, people tend to like it. I know very few companies where it's actually gone wrong. Not since years ago. I think BT did one of the first experiments with remote working in about 2002. I do remember them launching that, and then the following year saying they did have a number of people saying, can we come back to the office? But that was because they hadn't. And again, I'm not criticizing people. Someone had to go through this in order to learn it, so we could all learn from it. But that was when someone said, you will not work in the office. That's not flexible. Flexible is you can work in the office because you have to have meetings. You must come into the office because you've got to feel part of the team and not feel excluded. But you don't have to be here all the hours that God sends.
Yeah. But what do you think are the main business drivers to the deployment of UC? It isn't the technology?
No, I think this is where UC and its advocates have a little bit of a problem, because the main drivers as far as the business is concerned is its cost savings. They see someone like Stelgies or someone like whoever else selling video equipment, they think, great, we don't have to spend money on airfares. Funnily enough, if you're going to have a really good meeting with someone you've never worked with before, then shaking hands, sitting down and drinking coffee together is probably a very good way to do it. I had experience of that recently. I was doing some work for the New Statesman going over to Gibraltar. There was no substitute for actually visiting people, walking around and appreciating you really could just walk around the whole place and get a feel for the businesses there and actually see, touch and feel people. Not much, just shaking hands, nothing funny. But there will be occasions when you can actually sort of substitute the technology, but not every single time.
No, I mean, I've until very recently, I didn't get the whole video piece. I've met you face to face. I kind of know what you look like now. The next time I speak to you on the phone, I've got a picture. I think Skype changed that for me. Being able to see somebody on the other end, have a conversation with them, that then expands into Microsoft Link. I've started to understand the value of the video, but there is nothing more important than the face-to-face to start with.
I agree. People buy from people, not technologies. If you're running a business, particularly, then the technology has its place. If we needed a 5-minute meeting and we'd already met, then we really don't need to. You don't need me to come here and drive up the wrong road again or something, and all that sort of stuff. Just a 5-minute video will do it because I can find my own office in my house. On the other hand, given my internet connection, you might feel differently, and it may be actually easier to get me down here again. However, I think it is very important to have that technology, but it's all. The whole thing about unified communications is it should be supporting the business relationships and the personal relationships as well. It exists for people in the consumer space as well.
And how much has that consumerisation of the device impacted what we do at work?
Massively. When I started writing about technology in 1989, a computer was largely a thing you had at work. You might have an Amstrad word processor at home, but don't snigger. You remember that time. It was the technology was stuff that happened in the workplace. Sometime around when AOL launched and with it Instant Messenger, sort of early 2000s, people started to think, it launched in the mid-90s in the UK, but Instant Messenger really started taking off when broadband became much more frequent, so people would be online at the same time. That started people thinking, why can't I do this at work? And then they started bringing work ideas as home ideas, domestic technology ideas into the workplace.
At which point the IT department said you can't do that.
Yes, that's right.
We can't stand still for 5 years.
Yeah, that's right. But then it becomes ridiculous. People think, well, this is stupid. I'm Skyping to show Granny that how the kids are getting on, and they're not letting me do video conferencing at work. This is ridiculous. And it was ridiculous. And I think the IT departments, to their credit, have got themselves moving.
I mean, I have been absolutely astounded that some of the large corporations, those sort of bolted down management consultancy style businesses, are allowing this whole bring your own device. Now, I know there's a security piece around the outside of that, but I find that absolutely staggering. There's
a security piece around that, but there's also a recruitment piece around that. Who are you going to exclude? How many really good job candidates are you going to exclude? Who are the best managers of tomorrow, the forward-looking ones, are you going to exclude because they can't bring their iPhone into work? Or because they can't bring their Android, or they can't bring their BlackBerry. I'm being very even-handed here. It's not about what technology you've got. Immediately you've got people going and buying their iPads, going and buying their tablet computers, all those sorts of things. It is senseless to replicate that if you're a manager. And the great thing about if you're an MD like MD of something like Stelgies is you've got a whole workforce saying, may I save you the money of buying me a laptop computer? Can I use my tablet instead? Now, of course, it's not really a cost saving except in CapEx. In terms of OpEx, it can be quite costly because you've got to support it. And as you say, there's the very important security piece. You've also got to have all those policies about whose job it is if something goes wrong to repair it, what happens if it's lost and it's got some of your commercial data on it, all that sort of stuff. However, there is this initial saving, which I think is appealing to a lot of people.
You talk about the workforce. We talked a little bit about flexible working practices. It's a report from Department of Work and Pensions, interestingly titled "Flexible Working: Working for Families, Working for Business." A report by the Family Friendly Working Hours Task Force. So 65% of respondents say flexible working practices have a positive effect on recruitment and retention. But there's still a lot of people that are nervous about allowing their staff flexible working practices, despite the availability of the technology. How do we move that forward?
Well, I think, in a way, You've touched on, and unknowingly that report has touched on one of the initial problems with it, in that the whole flexible working piece is so often used as a reaction to a problem. It mentioned families first. I'd like to work flexibly because I would like to see more of my family. I'd like to work flexibly because, I want to go to somebody's sports day, all those things, or because I want to look after an elderly relative, or all those family reasons. Those are good reasons. I'm not knocking those reasons. However, if you manage to build it into an office culture, build it into a building's, an organisation's culture, and say, we don't mind why you want to work on not on Thursday mornings. Maybe you just find Thursday mornings really stressful, or maybe by the end of the week you're exhausted and you'd much rather take Friday afternoons off and catch up with your emails on Sunday morning or something. That's okay. I think you need to sort of build it into the culture of an organisation. That has to start at the top, of course, and not just regarded as a piece of problem solving. I think it has to start at the top, and that is where a lot of managers are finding it very difficult. But I would urge those managers who do find this extraordinary and odd, go and have a look at some companies who've done it, talk to some other managers, join your local, if you're a small business, join your local chamber of commerce, ask people what they think. Hopefully there'll be some people there who can tell you that in their instance it works.
And what they saw was an improvement in employee engagement and motivation and
Plantronics is a company that has done this very well indeed. I do have a slight vested interest because they're a client, so I must declare that up front. Their staff retention, as in their intention to stay, it was well into the 90%. When they surveyed their 300 staff in the UK. Average, I don't know what the average is, but it's much significantly lower than that.
Yeah.
You think about the implications for your recruitment costs, if nothing else. How much money are you going to save, and how much more are you going to get out of those people? You're spending money on training these people, and they're hanging around for, well, potentially a lifetime, or, if not a lifetime, many years rather than just one or two.
Yeah.
So you're saving yourself an awful lot of cash and making them better employees.
To take it one step further, you talk about the invisible workforce. What do you mean by that?
That's being a journalist and an author. I'm always looking for catchy titles. I suppose it's a tacky way, if you like, of saying the workforce you can't actually see. People who work from home, who work on the road, many people like to manage people by the whites of their eyes. They manage. If I can't see you, I can't manage you. I've got to stand over you. I think that's rather dated. I think it's out of date. I think you've got to trust people. I think you've got to recruit the right people in the first place. This won't work for everybody. But I think you've got to trust people, the people you can't see, the people who are effectively invisible because they are performing their tasks, but to you they're just this person who's on the network somewhere, and you don't have to know where. And that's quite a mental thing for people to get over, something, an attitude change. Not caring particularly whether somebody is whether somebody's on site or not. I understand you're also talking to a friend of mine, Dave Copeland of Microsoft. I've interviewed him for the book, and he was telling me that Microsoft tends to give him his objectives and the outcomes they want. Say, that's the outcome, that's the date we need it. See ya, get on with it, and however you make it work, it's absolutely not up to us. So
that is a challenge for a lot of people. Much as I would like to be able to set a simple set of objectives to somebody, not really care whether they spend 3 days, 5 days, 7 days a week trying to achieve them. So long as they achieve them, that's great. That's very difficult to...
Managers have got to move with this as well, and you've got to have trust in your workforce. But then once you've established that that's there, and again, I'm not saying this is going to work every time for everybody. Once you've established that is there, how much more engaged are they going to feel with you? Because you're the guy who lets them go and get on with it and trusts that this work will come to them. And also, how many more innovations are you going to find your workforce coming up with? Because they've just thought of a way that this particular task can be done because they haven't had it broken down into chunks for them by somebody else in the way that things will typically be done. They may well make mistakes. Sometimes they will screw up. This is the nature of things. But it can be a very rewarding, very much more productive.
So is it also about breaking down the kind of corporate necessity to build a policy about absolutely everything?
Sometimes I think a policy can be not to have an express policy on something, or the policy can be we trust people, we trust them to get on with their jobs. This is very easy for me to say as a freelancer, of course, because I'm paid exclusively by outputs. Very rarely, today being one of the exceptions, do I have to be in a particular place at a particular time. Usually it doesn't matter where I am. Skype is a bit of an issue because I have to tidy the office, but apart from that, I've been doing this stuff for years because I've been working for myself. But taking that freelance mentality and transferring it into the staff workplace, there are gains to be had.
That's quite an interesting notion. You are a freelancer, as in a member of staff is a freelancer. Set your objectives, off you go. I'm not going to take that idea as mine, but that sounds like a very good idea.
It's not mine either, don't worry.
So can we just, let's go back to technology. What are the things that excite you at the moment? What are the devices, the apps, the direction of travel?
In terms of direction of travel, I suppose I'm the classic let's whine about the battery life, because that's an absolute nightmare constantly. And on the way to visit you, I was using my iPhone as a sat nav, and apart from the slight misdirection, it also overheated terribly. I put it back in my pocket and took it straight back out because it was actually getting very, very warm. So there's a few glitches to work on there. That's the 5, that's now obsolete, so maybe the 5C or the 5S will replace that. But there's those things. I like the fact that things are getting smaller and slimmer. I think that's really useful. I used to have to hulk around a quite substantial laptop computer when I was presenting to people. I now have a very nice little slim tablet thing. It's really easy to carry in a much smaller bag, just as I'm getting older and the various bags starting to go and things like that, so that's all quite useful stuff. Everything's becoming smaller, everything's becoming easier. Ease of use is absolute key, I think, because more and more people are not technologists, are going to have to use this stuff and will want to use this stuff. Let's help them enjoy it if we can.
Excellent, thank you very much. So I've been talking to Guy Clapperton, author, journalist, editor of UC Insight, part-time stand-up comedian. Thank you very much indeed.
It's been a pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.